So hey anime fans, the series name is What If Naruto Had Power of Avtar, so let's start the series. Long ago, the four nations lived in harmony with each other: the air nomads, the earth kingdom, the northern and southern water tribes, and the fire nation. But all that changed 100 years ago, when the fire nation attacked, starting a war to conquer the other three nations. And no matter how hard the nations fought, the fire nation and their army of firebenders were slowly pushing them back. With his only hope of being with the Avtar, the only one who could master the four elements of water, earth, fire and air, being the Avtar who could help maintain peace and balance between nations, only for the Avtar to disappear one day, never to be seen again, with everyone waiting for the day when the Avtar would reincarnate into a new bender and help restore peace and order to the world. But the current Fire Lord at the time, Fire Lord Sozin, enacted a plan to take down the air nomads, knowing that the next Avtar would be an airbender, him committing total genocide against all the airbenders, making sure none of them survived. When this happened, the Earth Kingdom and the Water Tribes waited for the day when the Avtar would be reborn again. Only they never did. Without a new Avtar, they began to believe that the Avtar cycle had been destroyed, and they lost hope that someone would save them from the Fire Nation, all but a few, who clung to the hope that the Avtar would return to bring balance to the world. 100 years have passed since then, with what was now called the 100-Year War, continuing its rage as the Fire Nation gained more control over the nations with each passing day, with only a few still managing to resist the control of the Fire Nations, including the land capital of Ba Sing Se and the Northern Water Tribe. Since then, the Southern Water Tribe has been attacked. All the waterbenders have been executed, and the tribe has split into smaller villages. Although unknown to the Fire Nation, one of those villages was home to the last waterbenders of the Southern Water Tribe, along with their non-bender brother. This was Katara and his older brother Sokka. Katara was still young, but without a doubt the most attractive of her people. She was not very tall to be 17, but curvy, with a slim waist and wide hips with a heart-shaped rear, some modest C-cup breasts that were still growing. Her brown skin gleamed from the glare of the snow at noon, and her eyes wandered from side to side among the icebergs. Are we there yet? The girl frowned when her companion, who complained impatiently, a boy she met a few days ago, had arrived in a lonely boat, according to the paddling. Something impossible considering they were thousands of kilometers from the mainland. The boy's name was Uzumaki Naruto, someone outgoing and very lively who apparently didn't have a bad day, although very impatient and distracted, considering that he was distracted by anything that caught his attention. Katara never in her life saw someone with golden hair and mustache marks. According to him, he had arrived with peaceful intentions, not seeking trouble with anyone in the village. He was only passing by, apparently looking for the answer to a question that until now no one could answer. How can I get back home? Obviously his older brother wanted him to leave as soon as possible. The last foreigners who came to his town only brought destruction. He couldn't blame him for reacting like that. But Katara was passive. She was just a kid after all, not just telling him to turn around and disappear, not in storm season at the South Pole. With the approval of the Great Mother, the boy will be allowed to stay, as long as you will not try anything and will help with the tasks in the tribe. What led to this? You know, when you said you were going to help the hunt, I didn't think he would complain so much to you. I'm not complaining, I'm just bored, she replied lazily as he continued to row, avoiding the glaciers. It would be bad to sink with Sokka's boat. He would go crazy. Well, you can find what to distract yourself with. Naruto couldn't help but focus his gaze on the girl's butt, as he leaned into the boat to check the cages that were under the water. The boy's gaze grew more intense as she leaned in further, causing her coat to rise to reveal some flesh, the thin line between her low back and pants. Blue, the teenager's face lit up red when he saw the girl's underwear, who kept checking the cages, until finding nothing she dropped them back into the water. Something happens? The waterbender was concerned when she saw that the boy looked tense and red. Are you sick? She asked her as she approached him, to put her forehead against his, and immediately the girl worried about how hot he was. Naruto stared at the brunette's face, who had her eyes closed, concentrating on the fever. The blonde couldn't detach his gaze from her face and her thin lipstick that seemed so soft and magnetic. In his distraction, neither of them noticed anything moving in the water. Before he could react, his boat was flipped over by a sword-nosed killer whale, which was apparently attracted to the bait in the cages underneath the boat. Both teens ended up falling into the icy waters. 5 minutes later, Today you will be dinner. Naruto dragged with effort the heavy body of the whale, cleaning the blood of the kunia. He kept it and looked at the great sea beast. He hoped that this would compensate for the loss of a boat. This is bad. Katara did not stop shaking. She was lucky to be taken out of the sea by the shinobi. But now they were wet to the bone, far from the village, without a boat, and apparently a snowstorm was close when she saw the clouds in the sky. What will we do? The Uzumaki was cold. He was obviously too proud to admit it. But he trembled slightly as he looked around. Even if he ran full speed on the water, it would take half an hour to reach the village. Half an hour was a long time at the North Pole without dry clothes and warm clothes. Katara tried to use her waterbending to remove the water from her clothes. But she only managed to tear her jacket. Obviously she wasn't that good yet. Concentrating as best she could, she moved her hands and created an ice dome, an igloo. Come in and bring what's left of the boat. Okay. Running through the ice floes, I took everything I could, and luckily I could rescue a good blanket from a polar bear and a little wood. I carried everything as fast as I could inside the igloo, where a trembling Katara was waiting for her, who was trying by all means warm your hands with your food. Make fire. The boy did not hesitate to obey. He took the pieces of wood from the boat, and began to rub the sticks to get to light a fire, and when you have the speed of a superhuman, it was only a matter of a few seconds to have a small flame, not making a bigger fire without risking melting the ice dome that protected them from the cold. It was crucial that the temperature remained stable inside the igloo. It would not prevent hypothermia, but it would give them time. Take off your clothes. Naruto only doubted it for a second. He immediately took off his clothes, unable to avoid looking at how Katara did as well. Both of them were left only with their underwear, and they hung their wet clothes near the fire and sat on the skin bare, still wet. You know what you're doing. Has it happened before? Several times angrily the girl hugged herself. She could see by the entrance of the igloo that the snowstorm had already started. They had to wait hours until she stopped a bit. Are you okay? Taking her mind off the accident, she focused on the boy next to her. I can ask the same. She returned the question with a smile, eliciting a short laugh from the girl, who she shook her head. I'm fine, she lied. That was obvious. You could see that her lips were turning purple, and her skin was turning paler, and she wouldn't stop shaking. You don't have to lie. The blonde approached the girl and wrapped her arm around her shoulders and approached her. How can you be hot? Asked confused the waterbender, who felt the warmth of the boy's body. And it was that she realized that they were closer than she thought. She could appreciate that the teenager was prettier than she thought, and even had more muscle than Sokka. I have my tricks. The truth did not have them. He was sure that the ball of hair inside him was passing its energy through his body to stay out of danger, because as he had already stressed several times, if he died, goodbye cruel world for both of us. Katara moved a little closer to the boy and relaxed. Although she was taller and bigger than him, it made her lean her head against his, and the blonde's head will get too close to her chest. They stayed several seconds in that position, enjoying the closeness and the warmth that each other gave off. But unfortunately it was not enough to avoid hypothermia. They needed to be even closer together. The waterbender briefly separated from the Uzumaki, and without looking at him, she leaned against the bearskin, turning her back to her. Looking over her shoulder, the girl had a red glow on her cheeks and bright eyes when she looked into his eyes. Could you come a little closer? Just to warm them up better, of course. Goddamn. Naruto had to resist the urge to throw himself at the girl, who was now using a softer and more timid voice, something that made the blonde's mind almost explode. As or more flushed than the girl, he approached the bearskin, and leaned closer to be behind her, to wrap her arms around her waist and to lean as close as he could against her. Naruto felt an intoxicating sensation as his nose caught the subtle scent of the waterbender's brown hair. By reflex he tightened his hug, pulling himself as close as he could, resting her head against her bare back. This made the teenager shudder, because of the boy's face rubbing against her back and hair. This was completely different than sleeping with Sokka. At least the golden-haired boy had better hygiene and didn't complain every 5 seconds. Everything's fine? She could swear the boy was acting weird when he felt something wet on his neck. To her confusion, she saw small tears in the teen's eyes. Naruto did not know what to say. He became too sensitive, and did not want to let go of the girl from the southern tribe for the world. I dreamed of this before. Dream what? Hug the one who sleeps next to me. I never did it before, he murmured, lost in bliss as he hugged the girl lovingly, almost fearing that if he released her she would disappear forever. He never had anyone to do it with. The lump that formed in the teenager's throat was hard to swallow. Katara didn't have to think much to realize that the golden-haired boy was an orphan, something very normal in the middle of a war. Although it seems he was an orphan from birth, in his life he had never felt the loving touch of a mother. That was what mortified Katara. Although the compromising position was not very ethical, she was able to allow this. It was not as if she would bother. They were sharing a hug so warm and strong. He could be like this all day, and it wouldn't bother him in the least. Katara smiled as she relaxed and just waited. Or so she wanted when she felt something hard lean against her ass, right between her perfect thighs, which trembled when she was supported by something hard and hot. I'm sorry. Naruto wanted the earth to swallow him. His face burned and he cursed that his penis had hardened from hugging the girl. Slowly he wanted to get away from her. Alright, but his arms were taken and he was pulled back against Katara, who still wasn't looking at him. He just held that position, unable to avoid moving his ass against the boy's cock. The teenager bit her lower lip at the hardness and size of that thing that was hitting her, but her curiosity growing as she wondered, what was she like and how big? She never saw one in her life, in the hands of someone other than a small child. She was a teenager in the prime of her youth. Her hormones started to rampage due to the current situation. She has never been with a boy before. He will approach her age and become intimate with her. And now that she had the chance, she couldn't help but make her move. Katara! Naruto stiffened as the girl moved her hips against his. She made her wonderful soft ass rub against her manhood, which she throbbed with longing for such a daring move. Without saying anything, the girl continued to move. Even if they were both still wearing underwear, she could feel each other. A few minutes passed in which the girl moved more and more. Her underwear became a thread that was lost between her buttocks, which enveloped the length of the teenager, who gasped. It was too much for him. Katara! The girl blinked in surprise when she felt something wet run down her thighs, the boy's cock looking like she went crazy from the way she was throbbing and twisting, as she shot her loads into her tight boxer shorts. Saint Ricardus Senine. Naruto had never felt something so intense and pleasant. Leaning his semi-hard penis against the soft of the water girl, I enjoyed the sensation. Even if it was uncomfortable that his boxers had been stained with his semen, he still enjoyed this feeling. That multiplied when you felt a soft hand. Oh! The single touch made the shinobi shiver. Katara's smooth and perfect hand was caressing his penis, causing her to almost instantly harden. Even turning her back on the boy, Katara showed off her skillful hands, which not only mended, cooked and helped her to tend to wounds in the inhabitants of her tribe, but they were light and skillful. She was not a problem with just one hand. Take down the last piece of the boy's clothing. She could swear she heard the tip of his cock hit one of her buttocks. That was shocking. Staying calm, she used her right hand to slowly begin to move up and down, gently stroking the length of the boy, who breathed heavily from the special attention the waterbender was giving. But Naruto didn't want to be the only one to feel pleasure. He also wanted to make her feel good. Oh, the girl could not contain a soft moan that escaped her lips, when the blonde's hands slid from her waist, up to her modest breasts, and squeezed her with enough force, carefully. Don't squeeze them too hard, strong. I'm sorry. Muttering an apology, he focused again on the girl's boobs. A very different thing was touching her boobs from her transformation oik no jutsu from hers. Another was touching a girl's boobs really. They felt so soft and elastic in her hands. Even if she was wearing her bra, that did not diminish her enthusiasm for the Uzumaki, who, looking for more, she took the sides of the bra and lowered them. It was a real shame that she couldn't see the hard brown nipples of the girl. But anyway, he squeezed and stroked them enthusiastically, making sure not to make it too rough, and that she enjoyed it too, and she apparently succeeded as the girl from the Southern Water Tribe kept moaning softly as she squeezed her nipples. Both adolescents did not stop stimulating each other. The little igloo began to heat up not only because of the small fire, but also because of the heat that the bodies of both adolescents gave off. The risk of hypothermia had already been left behind. It was only an excuse for them. Will continue in this exploration. Naruto. The girl was upset when the teenager kissed her neck and gave her an experimental bite. But that was not all. One of his hands, after caressing her breasts, and slowly stroking her flat stomach, tickling, until she reached an area that made the girl's face glow red. He couldn't help but groan quite loudly when the Uzumaki's fingers caressed his already wet lips in his intimate area. His touch was far from perfect. He was quite rough, something very obvious, considering that this was the first time you did something like this, but she made up for it quite enthusiastically. An enthusiasm that made the girl lose her breath and her heat flow through her entire body. The blonde was breathing on the nape of her neck, taking the time to kiss her and even bite her occasionally gently. Her hands did not stay still. Her left hand played with her breasts, one at a time to continue with another, paying special attention to her hard nipples. Her right hand was the most adventurous when rubbing her intimate area, his fingers caressing the wet lips of her pussy, until he went even further. Hot curiosity was something that was in every person, and Naruto was no exception. The boy was too focused on how the inside of the girl squeezed her fingers with enough force. He sat so wet and warm that he could not think of anything other than the feeling so warm that the girl gave him. The two of his fingers that were inside him began to move slowly from the inside out. He had to do it as slowly as possible so that it was the girl's liking and did not bother him. Naruto was apparently succeeding. The girl had a smile as she breathed heavily and the burning on her cheeks became more marked, not to mention the juices that were sliding down her thighs. She didn't neglect the boy either, his hand tightening firmly around the hard length, treating him harder and faster, something that made the teen growl with pleasure. In order not to be left behind, Naruto made another finger enter the warm interior of the water master, but he did not experience something curious, something small that was felt against her hand, located on her wet pussy. Without thinking he squeezed it with her thumb. Ah! Naruto! The girl was dislodged when the teenager squeezed her delicate clitoris, and her fingers entered her with more speed. She could not continue masturbating him when he threw himself on her. The teenager is intoxicated by lust, and I didn't even notice when it was taken from her chin. Katara, the girl was taken by surprise when the kiss on the lips, continuing to move in and out of her pussy, producing wet sounds that they were accompanied by the muffled moans of the waterbender. All this was the trigger for Katara to reach the limit, closing her eyes and with all her muscles tense, her inner walls tightened on the boy's fingers, so as not to let him out while her interior let out her nectar, which ended up wetting her thighs and hand, of the blonde. At the same time they both shared a passionate and awkward kiss. Neither of them had ever kissed someone in their young lives. Naruto tried by all means to forget that kiss, which was not even a kiss, it was just an accident that would haunt him until the day of his death. That was incredible. Katara tried to catch her breath once her orgasm was over. She never had so much pleasure in her life. Under her gaze she saw how the boy pulled his fingers out of her tight pussy. Yes, Naruto was still hard, her cock throbbing impatiently to be pleased. She slowly rose to be on top of the waterbender, still recovering from her climax. She noticed how tough the boy was, and it didn't seem fair that she was the only one pleased, so she leaned back against the animal's skin, and with a soft smile spread her arms, exposing her breasts. Do what you want, Naruto, use them however you want. That was enough to make Naruto blush even more than before, and he gave in to Katara's undeniably tempting suggestion. He didn't think about it a second longer and leaned forward, his hands resting on those perfect tits. His warm breath brushed the waterbender's left nipple, and her thumb worked to keep quiet when she watched him use her hands to gently squeeze and play with the lumps of flesh and then took it slowly into her mouth. Oh yeah? Katara moaned as Naruto slowly began to use his lips and tongue to play with his breasts, licking every part he could reach and stuffing as much breast as he could fit into her mouth, like a baby testing a mother's breast for the first time. I could do this all day, thought with anxiety and pleasure the teenager, who could not stop sucking and sucking on Katara's perfect breasts. It had a taste and texture that made him go crazy. You're doing great. She felt her body heat up and moisten, as she moaned with pleasure and pushed Naruto against her, encouraging him to continue stroking her golden hair with affection. For almost 15 minutes they will continue doing that, with the adolescent changing breasts every so often to make her enjoy it even more. As for the shinobi, she was in heaven as he continued to pay attention to the teen's breasts, as she massaged her left breast and her hard nipple with her hands. Katara was happy with the feeling, as she had never felt like this before. She had seen babies being breastfed by their mothers several times. She never thought to do something like that, in this regard. So as a reward she decided to return the favor while she pulled Naruto's head away from her breasts. With that, she moved back into the bearskin and moved away from her to sit up, slowly parting her legs from her, leaving her intimate area open to her. Come, Naruto, the girl muttered shyly, who felt her face burn in flames, for the look so intense that the blonde had. He slowly approached her. Curious, he studied Katara's vagina and marveled at the sight in front of him. It was a reddish pink, soft-looking, and a little brown head that crowned it. He could see the moisture slide between her tight lips. He reached out and touched her vagina with his fingers slowly. Oh! The result was obvious. The girl gave a long moan of pleasure. She was very sensitive at that moment down there, and that doing this will certainly be good to her. Go on, Naruto, go on. Katara encouraged Naruto with moans and saying his name slowly. That was enough to give him an intense pleasure, more than the previous one. He continued to explore her vagina. The waterbender looked at the boy and could not help but gasp as he blushed bright red from the way he was examining her in that moment. She had never felt so naked and so exposed in that moment before. But she wasn't going to let her shame stop her from enjoying these sensations at all. Naruto, do you see the little dot at the top of the slot? The Uzumaki was still blushing, but he looked, saw him and nodded, and Katara with a heavy breath and lust for the skies told him what to do. It was very difficult to keep his sanity because of how he looked at her, and the fact that this was the first time she was with a man. Touch it gently and use your tongue if ahhhhhhhh. Katara squealed with pleasure and surprise when Naruto wasted no time licking her clit, and the sensations that flooded her body made a girl feel even hotter. Feeling her body get even hotter in that moment, the shinobi smiled warmly as he began to lick, kiss his vagina and the waterbender's clit. Her expert and skillful actions, but Katara didn't care at all. At that moment, as she enjoyed the sensations that she was giving him. At that moment, she squeezed one of her tits, seeking to stimulate herself even more, and her other hand under her to take the adolescent's golden hair and bring him even closer to her intimate area that was at the boiling point. The pleasure and happiness that Katara was feeling grew minute by minute as Naruto continued to lick and suck his vagina hungrily. The two of them enjoyed this moment for all they had, while the taste of Katara's wetness was proving to be sweet for Naruto. Naruto, there, lick me more, don't stop, I'm close. Naruto did what Katara asked him without hesitation, and the pleasure between the two began to grow more and more intensity. The pleasure, the heart rate and the breath of the waterbender began to rise, as well as the sensation of Naruto's tongue on her labia and clit sent a great deal of pleasant tingling up and down her spine and through every nerve in her body, and she loved him so much. She could have gotten addicted to that feeling. This feels so good. I don't want it to ever stop, Naruto. The two finally reached their limits when Katara had a strong orgasm and her juices flowed out of her. Naruto took as much as he could. It was like a river of sweet nectar for the blonde. He licked as much as he could and licked his lips to clean them. He saw Katara was looking at him the whole time, with an expression that reflected absolute pleasure, desire and lust. That said a lot about how much she loved him at that moment. She wasted no time and quickly took the boy from hers to her shoulders, pulled him closer to her, and kissed him deeply as he lay on top of her at this moment. She enjoyed its taste mixed with her own juices. It was a delicious concoction that brought her primary senses to light. And the same could be said for Naruto right now as he kissed her back with the same fervor, and the two played each other, as they took turns licking and kissing each other's bodies. For both virgin teens, this was a moment they would never forget, and the main part was still missing. They are so soft, so firm, so delicious. Naruto licked and sucked on Katara's breasts with a very strong fervor, as she responded by stroking her hair lovingly, and rubbing the length of her with her free hand. After minutes of stimulation, the two paused to look into each other's eyes for brief seconds, until finally the Uzumaki could muster up enough courage to speak his mind. Can I put it in? Perhaps it was not the most romantic way to put it, nor the most delicate. But with the look that he had, it was enough for the girl, that, with a soft smile, she spread her legs from her. She just be soft, it's my first time, she asked in a soft, shy voice that would make anyone's blood sugar skyrocket. Nodding his head, the shinobi waited impatiently for her to lie on her soft skin. Positioning himself on her, he took the classic missionary position. Touching her thighs with her pelvis made the two share a pleasant chill. Here I go. She began to push her cock into her wet vagina and moaned loudly when she felt her cock separate her outer folds, and she enjoyed the sensation in that moment. This was the real thing in this moment, and time, and he was going to be sure to remember every moment of this. The sensations that the girl was experiencing were just as intense as him. She felt very different than her fingers. It was much thicker and longer than her female fingers that consoled her these teenage years. Naruto, slow please, she asked gently as she felt how he was entering her interior little by little, until she felt something hot slip from her lips. Confused, the girl saw that the shinobi stayed still. her cock throbbing as he shot her load into the waterbender entrance. I'm sorry, Naruto felt pathetic. The pleasure was too much and he could not contain himself. He could not fully enter the warm and humid cavity of Katara without finishing before starting. It was humiliating. Why do you apologize? The boy was taken from his cheeks, and before he could look up, he felt the warm and soft lips of the girl, that she kissed him in such a loving and delicious way that it made him feel in the clouds. Separating, they both looked at each other. Katara being the one who had a passive and kind look, she carefully caressed the length of her, which immediately hardened at her touch. Oh, releasing a sigh of joy, he relaxed by the hands so kind and skillful of the brunette, who pumped the manhood of her until she was already as hard as wood. Go on, Naruto. Nodding with his head, the boy paid attention, this time going slower and more relaxed. Little by little he entered again, separating the internal ones of the girl, who bit her lower lip, trying to contain her moans. Shit! Growling through his teeth, the boy felt a barrier that prevented him from continuing. Without thinking, he moved to take a thrust that made him break that barrier, and a line of blood came down from the intimate area of the girl. Quiet, oh! I just need a moment. She made him stop and not move a single muscle. Breathing so agitated, the girl waited a few seconds until the pain of losing her purity disappears, and when she feels more comfortable, she let him continue. Naruto gasped as he felt her cock move inside Katara's deep, wet vagina as she parted her outer folds and then into her wet inner core. His hands nor the girl's compared to the feeling of being in the most sacred place of Katara. It was so hot, wet, soft and tight. It was heaven or something close to it, and it blew his mind as the sensations flooded every nerve in his body at that moment. The sensations were absolutely delicious right now, and he was concentrating to enjoy every second of this, to ensure that these memories did not disappear from his mind anytime soon. As soon as Naruto was deep inside Katara, they both groaned. Ah! Yes. Naruto! She gave a long sigh of his pleasure. She had never felt so full in his entire life at that moment. He had never felt this pleasure in his life. They both did not move at all to savor the sensations and calm down to get used to this situation. Katara lightly licked Naruto's lips and kissed the tip of his nose. Now Naruto, go with everything. Naruto got the message and started backing away, and the feel of Katara's inner walls massaging his cock all over the place was so exciting that he almost had another early climax. But he controlled it the best he could in that moment, and as soon as he was about to, leaving out, he thrust inward, causing Katara to cry out in sheer pleasure and delight at the sensation. The two continued their actions, although the boy did it slowly to make the sensations they were feeling at the time last as long as necessary, and it was proving to be a good one when Katara placed a strong grip on him to be able to make sure that he continues, with his moving over her and make her feel the pleasure. The two enjoyed the sensations as Naruto started to pick up the pace with his movements, and Katara moaned loudly in approval as the two continued to love each other, and the sounds of their gasps and moans filled the little igloo, which seemed like it was going to melt by the heat that they gave off. A heat that grew as Naruto began to move even faster. The moans and screams of the waterbender prompted the shinobi to give it his all. Naruto! Harder! Harder! Katara, you're so hot, so tight, oh Kami! Yes. More. More. Naruto leaned in and played with Katara's breasts with his mouth and tongue, and that made the waterbender moan even louder with pleasure, and aroused her even more as she kissed the boy in the same second that he stopped playing with her breasts. The intense kiss lasted only a minute, but that's when she reached her limit. Naruto! She had an orgasm, and Naruto moaned loudly when he felt her inner walls massage and caress his cock in such a way that he almost had an orgasm. But his control had miraculously survived the experience of Katara's inner walls milking his cock into her soft, tight, and wet grip. It had been a miracle that he hadn't come yet. Katara lay on her back on the bearskin, trying to catch her breath and enjoy the aftermath of the harsh climax that made her feel so good. Katara! She heard him and blushed as she nodded her head and turned around to lean on her knees and hands. This position of hers was somewhat dirty, but she put with the pleasure that she would give him would be nothing. The waterbender leaned down, showing her vagina still wet and dripping from her own juices and shinobi seed. Naruto rushed to make his move as he thrust deep into her vagina once more, and they both moaned. Katara found her a good position and offered her a new degree of pleasure and sensation, while he found that she was even tighter in this position right now, and she was enjoying it a lot as she held Katara's hips and started to move her hips as well. Oh yeah! Yeah. 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 Just like that. Katara moaned with a bit of saliva escaping from her lips to her chin as Naruto moved in and out of her vagina with each slow, deep and hard thrust of her cock. She turned to see Naruto that she was blushing and also having the expression of intense and delicious pleasure on her face at the moment, and that made her smile as she continued to let him get away with it. In that moment, the shinobi continued his actions and began to move faster and push even deeper than before and tried to use faster and stronger thrusts and hit Katara's most sensitive area, and that greatly added to the sheer joy and pleasure that she was feeling. At that moment, the blonde reached for her tits with her hands and began to play with them, then ran his tongue from her back to her shoulder gently and with a great deal of erotic touch. Naruto! You are so good! You are the best! Don't stop! Then the two kissed deeply as Naruto continued to pound deeper, harder and harder than before at Katara, and she responded with even greater pleasure, as the two lovers continued to fuck like there was no tomorrow. Katara leaned back and Naruto hugged her as he continued to move her cock in and out of her soaked vagina, and the two kissed once more, and he touched her breasts, and used a free hand to reach her vagina and then touch her, where her clit was, dipping her finger into her juices first to make it easier, and as soon as she touched her clit, she exploded. Naruto! The intense screams of the girl did not stop him, they only encouraged him to continue with more strength and speed. He continued with his actions of caressing Katara's breasts, while he kissed her and licked her neck, moving his cock in and out of her vagina wet, and playing with her clit, pleasing the waterbender even more, and it wasn't long before the two of them finally reached their orgasms. They both screamed at the same time as they reached the climax that left them breathless. He shot his charge inside Katara, and the results spoke for themselves in this instant as they were both tense and flushed from the feeling of release. Oh! You see, Katara felt the warmth of Naruto's thick semen filling her vagina with great pleasure and satisfaction, so much so that she had an orgasm again at that exact moment, and the pleasure of the double orgasm she had was enough to knock her down, and she almost fell forward. And if it hadn't been for Naruto's hands on her breasts and her clit, she would have. The feeling of the boy's semen deep inside her core and filling her to the breaking point was so good for Katara that she could get the message from her. Naruto felt the heavenly sensation of Katara's inner walls milking him from every drop of his semen. It was an unmatched experience that would have passed out from all the pleasure that flooded all his senses. He felt so alive and every nerve in his body was stimulated until beyond its limits. He could also hear Katara gasping in her orgasm and the feel of her wetness flowing from her vagina and down around her cock that became soft within the tight walls of her. Her fingers left the girl's clitoris, and he was amazed by the juices that covered her fingers, and to her disbelief and excitement, he saw how the waterbender took her wrist and took her wet fingers from her inside her warm mouth. Naruto stared in disbelief as Katara sucked on her fingers in such a slow and sensual way. Her cock instantly straightened, throbbing almost to the brink of exploding. Her fingers were licked by the girl's soft tongue and sucked by her lips. It was an incredible sensation that he could not describe, and the sensation multiplies when he was taken from her face by the soft hands of the waterbender. She turned and the two kissed for long seconds, enjoying the unique flavor that the other had. They both opened their mouths and their tongues touched in a very erotic dance, and then they kissed deeply at that precise moment. Almost a whole minute passed until they had to separate due to lack of air. They moved away from each other. That was amazing, a fun way to warm up in this cold. Katara smiled at Naruto, and then closed her eyes as he hugged her against his chest. The two of them stayed lying down, while the snowstorm outside was losing steam. Sokka, you are being paranoid. Is not true. Only a few hours passed, one left, one of light. Exactly. I never took so long to go hunting with Katara. I don't trust that boy and his mystical powers. The only teenager from the great southern tribe was equipping himself by putting on his war armor and carrying his trusty boomerang in his back. He always knew that that boy with golden hair of a bad omen. Don't imagine what he will have done with his little sister, so all he had to do was go find her and bring her back. Is this about your sister or your boat? The great old woman questioned doubtfully, looking at her grandson with suspicion. How can you think that? I love my sister and I will go looking for her because I care about her. Then why are you bringing your boat repair kit? Sokka hid his toolbox behind him, ignoring the looks his grandmother and other tribesmen had. Enough. I will leave this village, search for Katara and my boat, and no one will stop me. Hello, Sokka. Sokka shook his head to the side to see his younger sister calmly enter through the village entrance, followed by a smiling Naruto who, to the joy of all the people in the village, was carrying a large bow sword. Surely you would give him a few months of food for this harsh winter. Look, Sokka! It's huge! The boy dragged with the help of some of the clones of him the great animal, to drop him at the feet of the teenage Boomerang, who was open-mouthed, although he quickly changed to one of disinterest. Ahem. Okay, I've seen bigger ones, but that's okay, thanks, sorcerer. I told you that I am a shinobi. Michi, it makes no difference to me. Feigning disinterest, he started to walk around the great sea beast, but stopped short when he saw that there was nothing on the shore of the harbor. And my boat? Yeah, sorry, is that thing. You destroyed my boat. It took me 2 years to put it together and make it look the way I wanted it. You are a lousy hunter to lose your transportation. But if I walk on water, I don't need a boat for short distances. Silence, sorcerer. I'm going to make you mincemeat. While the two teenagers were arguing, Big Gran was looking suspiciously as Katara was looking at the boy and caught a subtle scent that made him shake his head. Katara, you are a pervert. What's? Not far from the small tribe, an armored ship was looming on the sea horizon, leaving which ice floe crossed on its way. On the mast flamed a red flag with a black flame drawn. At the bow of the ship was the deadliest and most dangerous trio of the Fire Nation. The first was the tallest of the three. She had dark hair tied with needles that held her hairstyle. Her eyes were dark as if long hair, and her skin was somewhat pale. She wore a long yukata that covered much of her body, still only exposed her hands and face, which still showed her slim figure, C-cup breasts, a slim waist and moderate hips. Without a doubt an incredible beauty for a 19-year-old girl. The second was a girl who had a more cheerful appearance, due to her pink and beige dress, being these a top that covered the upper part of her body, leaving her arms free, showing her generous breasts that were quite large for a girl of her age. D-cup. Her top exposed her stomach, marked and carved with the delicacy of an artist, such a small and charming waist. Her pants were loose that gave her more freedom of movement, and although they were loose they did not hide that she had a rather curvy and large butt, the wet dream of every man. She also highlighted her brown hair tied in a braid, and her eyes were brown, with a round and immature face that would make her appear to be under 18, if it weren't for her curvy figure. Finally there was the youngest adolescent of the three. This one may be 18 years old. She wore a dark-colored armor with red edges that covered a large part of her body, but the armor, when being attached to her body, allowed to appreciate her body defined by her slim waist, firm and large, almost D-cup breasts, large and charming hips. Her charms were not only because of her physique, she had features that only a princess would have. Her skin was somewhat pale, although not as pale as the tallest girl in the group. Her hair was dark, and she had 2 locks that masked her face and highlighted her golden eyes. The latter had her gaze focused on the horizon, with a glow of anxiety and impatience caressing her band with a metal plate on her neck, which had a blade engraved on it. The hunt around the world seemed to have come to an end.